Jesus Trilogy, Book 1, The Four Messiahs, Chapter 52. Dad, we're undefeated, Johnny said. I know, son. And your mother and I are very proud of you. Well, what more could you ask than to be proud of me? I've been over this ground 100 times, son. God has ordained that you be a minister, a priest. He has said that you are to herald the Messiah. I know that. Johnny, old Zack said sternly. He had developed a resting tremor which disabled him from many tasks, but his mind was sharp despite the prior stroke and palsy. He was recently getting some fluid buildup in his legs. Elizabeth, who was not the picture of health either, had not only a lot of fluid in her legs, but also suffered from arthritis. She was developing some deformity in her fingers and a lot of stiffness, especially in the mornings. Despite her own problems, however, she was very worried that Zack was not long for this world. Dr. Luke had prescribed a new root extract, said it would make his heart stronger, but old Zack still did have occasional chest pain. Our final game of the year is next weekend, the week before graduation. All the coaches will be there, and some scouts from as far away as Jerusalem. I know already they are interested in me. But the Lord says, you know how poor we are. I never have any new clothes. One big contract like the scouts say I'll get will set us up for life. I can get you and Mom all the things you need. Johnny had pleaded his case before, but despite what he thought were good logical reasons, his father remained adamant. What would you do if I just go ahead and sign? Son, it's not what I would do, it's what God would do. He took my voice away for 9 months. It's a bunch of hogwash, Dad. Lots of people have strokes. You probably had a stroke making love to Mom in order to have me. Then quickly he said, I'm sorry. Zack didn't get angry. In fact, a smile came to his face, remembering that last night of bliss. 18 years. He never could have sex ever again. How he missed it. After all, he was a man, and part of being a man was the God-given right to love a woman and be loved by one. Physical intimacy was the culmination of that love. Zack loved Elizabeth as much as ever, but he so missed being able to express it physically. His recurring dream was to be in a heavenly mansion with Elizabeth in a huge bedroom with a mirrored ceiling, flowers everywhere, and a balcony looking out over a huge garden. And there were he and Elizabeth making love. He imagined their perfect new bodies melding together as one. Zack longed for that day, but he knew Johnny must play a part in the Messiah's victory, not over Rome, but over all evil. He had concentrated on the scrolls even harder these past few years, and had concluded that Johnny's cousin Jesus indeed was the Messiah sent from God. Zack had also concluded that his little Johnny was the one who was to pave the way for that victory. He feared for his son, yet he was very proud that he, Zacharias, an old priest, and his wife Elizabeth were given such an important part to play on the world stage. He had prayed long and hard that his son would see the light and not turn down such an important part in that play, good versus evil. So he persevered, determined not to rest until he was sure that Johnny would accept the role of messenger, the voice crying in the wilderness, preparing the way for his cousin Jesus to lead that great fight against Rome and evil. Zack didn't share with Johnny that he believed his nephew Jesus was to be that Messiah. Johnny wouldn't believe him anyway. Zack knew God would take care of it, but he also knew that Johnny would have to say yes to God or another plan would have to be made. I'm tired, son. I gotta get some sleep, but please, please promise me you'll think it over. I'll think it over, Dad, but I'm quite sure what my decision will be, Johnny said, shaking his head. Ooh, Zachariah winced in pain. This 88-year-old body isn't what it used to be. Johnny helped his father to a chair. Once I was young and strong like you. You will be again, Dad, when you get to heaven. Zack was surprised at this comment. To hear Johnny talk about anything but football brought a smile to his old craggy face. Maybe there was hope yet. Good night, Johnny. Good night, Dad. And son, I won't forget. I'll think about it, I promise. Johnny stayed up a while studying. He had 2 more finals next week, and then would be the big game. The Four Horsemen were undefeated through 4 years of high school and 4 years of grade school. They were the talk of all Judea. Big money was riding on this game as well. The bookmakers in La Viego had them as 7-point favorites, but their opponents, Jerusalem East, were a strong team. They were big and tough. Though Johnny had never played against them, he had gone down to Samaria a few weeks earlier with Coach Vincenti to scout them. Their line averaged well over 200 pounds, and their feature back Simon was both big and fast. It was to be Simon versus Johnny. Simon was of dark skin, and it was said he came from somewhere south of Egypt. Johnny didn't know where and didn't care, but he was impressed. Simon could flat out play the game. Jerusalem East had annihilated all its foes by 30 points or more. They were a perfect 9-0. The little Nazareth High had done nearly as well, except for that 1-point win over arch rival Capernaum. No matter, Johnny was confident they could beat anybody. After all, they had an 8-year winning streak. With all these thoughts racing through his mind, Johnny just couldn't sleep. His thoughts went from football to his big contract. Then there was his girlfriend, and the promise he'd made to his father. He was nearly 2, and it finally hit him. He would sign a big contract after winning the Judean Championship game, go on to star in the JFL, Judean Football League, and then become a preacher. He would go to the seminary in Jerusalem and do what his father wanted after all. He could surely do both things. Why hadn't he thought of this before? Surely Dad would agree to that. He would even put it in writing. That would make his dad happy. Everybody would be happy. Contented finally, Johnny slipped off into a deep sleep, a smile etched on his face. It seemed like Johnny was always the center of any trouble. 1 week earlier he had gotten into another scrape. He'd gone out in the evening to check on the field for the game they would have the next day. The field was wet and sloppy, water running in little rivers along the yard lines. The field was poorly drained and didn't tolerate rain well. By the next day it would be a quagmire, and this did not suit Johnny. He considered himself a good mudder, and he could run well in any conditions, but with the mud the passing game would be eliminated, and he and Judas would have trouble blocking for one another. And Judas was not a good mudder. Johnny recalled the last time Judas ran in the mud. He was terrible. The mud was so slick Judas could hardly stand up. The Four Horsemen almost lost that game. They won 2-0 on a safety.